You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Looking forward to today's Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday show. We're going to be bringing you the 5 hormones that hurt your metabolism. And they do this whenever they are not balanced. Because remember, all of us need these hormones in our body. But what happens is, over time or through improper lifestyle, diet, living, all of those things, they become imbalanced. So what I want to do is I want to share with you what hormones those are to look for, then also what happens when they become imbalanced, how that affects certain areas of your body that we know now, of course, how to get them back in balance to not only boost your metabolism, but to give you more energy all day long, which is what those hormones also provide. Besides that, we'll be talking about how they affect your mood, and of course, if the mood isn't right, a lot of these things that we talk about, they're not going to happen, right? We're not going to be able to implement those plans that we want. So let's get right into today's show. Like I said, really looking forward to this one because I really get to blend what happens in the real world. So from a clinical perspective, what do I see happen in my practice? But then also, what's backed up by the science? What do we see? What do we see on lab tests? What do we see these hormones when they start to get out of balance? What happens to the human body? And again, it's very predictable. So that's why I could even just look at specific numbers and say, oh, most likely this person's suffering from this, this, and this, and the weight gain might be happening here, or the energy or the mood might be moving in a certain direction. And we can tell that based on the numbers and also based on the ratios. So let's get into that right now. So the first hormone that I want to chat about is estrogen. So this happens in both men and women, that estrogen levels can start to increase. Now, the interesting thing is this. I see them increased in my practice, so that is true. But what we're finding more and more is this thing called estrogen dominance. And I just want to explain that really quickly and what that means. So essentially what happens in both men and women, but again, mainly women, is that estrogen levels remain normal. Meaning like if you're looking at a lab test and your levels somewhere, let's say around a 2. Okay, well, a 2 would be perfectly normal on the lab test that we run. Now, what happens though is that progesterone levels are low. They're below 75 or below 100. Now, when we're looking at that, we're saying, okay, this is really interesting because estrogen levels look totally normal, but progesterone's low. But because estrogen and progesterone are partners, they're dance partners, they need to stay in balance, they need to stay in rhythm. When one of them's a little off, such as progesterone, it goes a little bit low, and I'll explain why in a moment. Estrogen starts to look like and act like it's high. And the reason is it's relatively high. So as opposed to progesterone, or when looking at the 2, estrogen actually is high because progesterone's so low, it lends itself to then estrogen being dominant. So by looking at the ratio of estrogen to progesterone, which we can do, we can actually see where that plays out as well. And so a lot of times, again, from a clinical perspective, I will see women come in with lowered mood or more irritability or a little bit of sluggishness or weight gain, a lowering of metabolism. I'll see oftentimes, so I'm going to be talking about today where the weight gain actually and typically happens. And for a lot of women, that does happen around the hips. So when a woman becomes more estrogen dominant, same with men, same exact thing for men, you'll start to see more of the weight gain go around the side of the hips, right? So glutes, side of the hips. That's typical. Now, when do we see the first signs in women? Well, we start to see it about 5 days to maybe 7 days or so before menstruation or before day 1 of your period. That's when we'll start to see the first symptoms. If that's happening to you, you may be becoming now more estrogen dominant. That means you're going to get maybe some bloating-based issues or some water weight gain. You might get a light headache. You might get some cramping. What else may happen? A little bit of lowering of mood, a little bit more fatigue. These are all signs that maybe progesterone isn't where it should be. Now, if it's very mild or it might just be, for a couple hours, a day or two before menstruation, I'd say that's fairly normal. Like, that's not too far off. We don't need to make too big a deal about it. But if you do find yourself gaining 3 to 5 pounds or so, let's say 5 days, 3 days or so before your cycle does start, that's something to look at. And estrogen dominance is just so common in my practice. I see it in perimenopause. I see it in menopausal-based women. And I also do see it in men. I see men who convert more testosterone to estrogen than they should. So that's our first one we need to look at. We need to look at weight gain. Is it happening around your hips? Are you feeling that sluggishness? Is your body starting to look softer overall? Meaning like you're holding more of that inflammatory-based water weight. Something important to take a look at. And again, I'm going to talk about how to rebalance all these hormones at the end. So the second one, and that oftentimes causes this estrogen-based dominance, is and are the adrenals. So when the adrenals start to get fired up, what happens? Well, something inside of the brain is signaling to produce more stress, essentially, meaning your hypothalamus is telling your pituitary gland, we need to activate the adrenals, specifically first the adrenal medulla, to say, hey, we've noticed a stress. There's some type of stressor. There's some type of threat. Now, whether it's real or perceived, that's up to basically our response, our adrenals, our brain. And so what happens is we produce this thing called adrenaline or norepinephrine. And that gets us fired up. We're ready to go. We get into fight or flight. And then our body produces this thing called cortisol. So the adrenal cortex, which is essentially more the inside of the adrenals, starts to produce a glucocorticoid. So it's a balanced hormone that says, all right, now it's time to say we need to either break down sugar from the liver, meaning liver glycogen. We need that for a fast fuel source. We need to kick it into high gear because we're in fight or flight right now. Something's happening. We need to go into this protective, survival-based mode. So hopefully there is actually some type of activity being done. Maybe you are doing intervals. You are in some type of or exercise-based threat mode. And that will actually allow you then to use that kick up in glucose or the kick up in what's called gluconeogenesis, where your liver is actually starting to convert sugar, stored sugar, into energy, into fuel. But of course, if we're just sitting at our desk and we're stressed about deadlines, or we're sitting in traffic and someone just cut us off, or we're going to be late for a meeting or whatever it might be, well, we don't actually use up some of that sugar that's been brought into our bloodstream. So what happens is that, okay, body says you're not going to use this? Fine. We're going to then store it as body fat. So a lot of times if it's not being used as or restored as glycogen, it's simply going to the adipose tissue, which is the body fat. And our body fat will store that again for a rainy day if we ever need to oxidize that at a slower point for fuel. The problem is that all of this cortisol as well can cause inflammation. And then an inflammation or inflammaging-based state as well can increase estrogen. It can actually activate and change our next hormone disruption, which we'll talk about in one moment. But what I want to do is talk about in my practice, oftentimes when I see the effects and results of high cortisol, I start to see damage with sleep. If we're not getting enough sleep or good quality sleep, we're actually gaining weight as well, or we're not able to rebuild the muscle, the metabolism, and we're not able to oxidize body fat in the same way overnight. So that's really, really important. Also, if we're not getting quality sleep from too high cortisol, especially at night, and again, we can check that, is that we are not able to, I talked about it from a rejuvenation-based standpoint, but we're not able to uptake glucose in the same way. We can't metabolize it the same way. We're more in that stress-based state. So really important to look at overall inflammation with adrenal-based dysfunction. And next, one more place is that usually the belly. So a lot of times people with adrenal-based issues, I'll see the whole love handles and belly start to accumulate belly fat and body fat. That's a really good sign right around that belly if you're putting on weight. Not so much in different areas, but right around there. Really good to look at adrenals. A few other things which I want to talk about. All right. So the thyroid's up next. And we know, because I've spoken about this on previous Cabral concepts, that when your adrenals are not functioning properly, they can actually affect thyroid-based metabolism. I won't go through all of that today. I've spoken about that on previous shows, whether it's a Total Wellness Tuesday or whether it's specific thyroid-based shows. Can't recommend enough. Just go to stephencabral.com/podcast. Type in thyroid if you'd like, and you'll be able to see my previous shows on thyroids, meaning the 4 minerals that your body needs to boost your thyroid, and also the toxins that lower thyroid as well. So really important shows to check out. But on today's show, what I want to talk about is specifically on metabolism. So the main thing that we need to know is that when our body's using the adrenal output to a higher degree to deal with fight or flight, it actually starts to lower thyroid response. So really important to look at that because you can have lower thyroid from toxicity-based issues, same with high estrogen. You can have it from stress. You can have it from an autoimmune-based issue like Hashimoto's. So, of course, in that case, we need to look at the gut. We need to look at food sensitivities. Really, really important there. But overall, thyroid, when it begins to slow, what happens is our energy expenditure or caloric burn goes down. Now, a lot of people don't know that. But the thyroid really is like that thermostat. It's the regulator of energy. So what happens is we can get the cold extremities, we can get the lower mood, the sluggishness, all of those things. But we also start to put on weight. And the reason we put on weight is it lowers our output. So for example, if you could have gotten by with, let's say, well, your body needed 1,800 calories a day for fuel. And again, I've spoken about this on basal metabolic rate. Check that out at stephencabral.com/podcasts. And what happens is, let's say your previous burn per day, meaning like your break even for calories in, calories out was 1,800, okay? So now with a lowered thyroid, it might have dropped down to like 1,500. Now, all of a sudden, if you eat the same 1,800 calories, well, 300 calories of that may be stored as body fat, which, of course, none of us want. And I've spoken about it before. I've talked about this many times that it's not about calories in, calories out, but it is these things like your hormones that regulate calories in, calories out, and how they're going to be used. So in order for, because calories do matter, in order for you to be able to burn more calories per day, you need to boost that thyroid. You really do. So one of the big things that I look at, especially with thyroid, is a lot of people seem to put on, believe it or not, they've got a little bit more neck fat in thyroid-based issues. They have also love handles. They start to put on that weight right above the hips. Now, again, you can put on weight for the entire body, but specifically when I'm just looking from clinical-based perspective, right above the iliac crest, which are those two bones on your hips, if you were to press in right around belly button circumference around the waist, push on your hips. That's right where the love handles are affectionately known, right above the obliques on your waist. So really important, that is the third hormone that we're looking at. And thyroid, of course, is looking at T4, T3, TSH, and then those are what get the thyroid to thrive, right? So when we're looking at balanced adrenals, we want to make sure that the output is not too high or too low. Okay, we just want it normal output through the day. You want it high enough so that you have energy, because the adrenals is going to be for energy, not too high that it's causing these issues, and not too low so that you don't have any energy. Now for thyroid, we want to see optimal T3, T4, so these are the hormones that we can actually use, especially T3. And then we want to also make sure that TSH is below a 2.5. Okay, ideally 0.5 to 2. Anywhere within that range, up to 2.5, optimal output for the thyroid. If it goes up to 3, 4, 5 or more, well, you can see that your brain, your hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis, not adrenal, but thyroid axis, is actually telling your body to produce more thyroid stimulating hormone to create more of the active hormone that your body needs. Now, it's also great, if possible, to check out TPO. So we want to look at antibodies that your thyroid or your body may be producing that could lead to something like Hashimoto's, which is actually an autoimmune response against, let's say, the thyroid. So much more than that, right? Because we need to look at the toxins. We need to look at a lack of things like selenium and iodine. We need to look at chlorine. We need to look at fluoride, gluten-based intolerances, so many different things, right? So it's not so simple, but what we want to do is we can look at all that with whether it's food sensitivity testing, looking at the thyroid, all those great things to figure out what's wrong with your thyroid. And then, of course, we can correct it from there. But again, the whole reason for this show is just show you that nothing is in isolation, right? All these people just testing their thyroid. Again, it's not your fault. Again, your doctor, your functional medicine practitioner should also be testing your cortisol levels and estrogen, because if they're not along with your thyroid, it's not a total picture. Okay, so you just start supplementing with thyroid. Well, that might not be necessary. It's really not. If we have clear issues with the adrenals, well, why would we just supplement with thyroid? Because that's not going to get to the underlying root issues. Okay, so really important to look at. All right, my next one, my fourth favorite one to look at, what are the hormones that can really disrupt the metabolism? It's insulin. It's blood sugar and insulin, right? So glucose is that thing, right? It's that thing in our body that we can test that actually shows how much sugar is floating around in the bloodstream. So that's important to look at. Hemoglobin A1C and sugar. We want to look at that. Glucose. Okay. But insulin is our way of tracking how hard the body is working, essentially at producing insulin to take that sugar and get it into our cells. Well, why does that matter? Well, we need to actually use the sugar that's in our blood for energy. And a lot of times the cell membrane is not allowing that sugar in. the insulin receptors are blocked with, actually estrogen dominance and high cortisol. That can do it as well. That can actually hurt that mechanism of the cellular uptake of sugar. And insulin is the factor that we need, our pancreas produces in order to get that sugar in. So now what happens in insulin resistance is that our cells are not uptaking the sugar right away as they should. So blood sugar is elevated after a meal. Our body's supposed to produce insulin, which it does, and it starts to then get it into the cells. If it's not working well enough or the sugar was too high a spike, our body then overproduces or starts to produce more insulin that then eventually, before you get to type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes, gets it into the cell. But what happens is now sometimes someone can become hypoglycemic because they produce so much insulin that there was insulin left over, or we started to get a drop in blood sugar because it did its job maybe too well. Okay, so of course, what we want to do is we want to balance blood sugar levels in the first place. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. Now, what happens when insulin levels or blood sugar levels really are getting too high? Belly fat love handles, without a doubt, especially a lot of people who are even hard gainers. You can look at their waist and be like, wow, does that person have like cortisol issues, which again goes hand in hand with blood sugar issues? Because right around their belly, just like this little spare tire around the belly, everything else looks normal, legs, arms, good. But what happens is they get that spare tire on the belly. I see that a lot in guys especially. Really, really important to look at because that can be clear indicators of cortisol and blood sugar issues. And again, the two go hand in hand. They're not separate. All right, the last one I want to talk about today, I really want to get into this, is because this vitamin is often known just as a vitamin, but really it acts as a hormone. Although we've studied it so in depth, it's really looked at, we still don't know everything about it and how it works and how important it is to get this on a daily basis and how most of us are lacking in it, where we really are. And that is hormone or vitamin D. All right, why is this so important? All right, it affects all the other hormones in your body. It affects the processes in your body. That's why vitamin D is so important, is because it's not just about the vitamin D, right? It's not just about how much vitamin D that you have in your blood. It's how it's working within the body. So literally, there was a great study, and I just wanted to show you this because this is only with 1,000 IUs a day of supplementation. All right, so this study, which was actually done at the University of Minnesota, looked at that people that supplemented with vitamin D, nothing different. Okay, they didn't do anything different. They supplemented with vitamin D. In 11 weeks, just 11 weeks. So just, what's that, about 2.5 months or so? In about 2.5 months, they lost an average of 5 pounds, which is somewhere around an extra like 230 calories burned per day just by using vitamin D. So I thought this was amazing because we don't know the exact mechanisms involved for how vitamin D is speeding up all these different metabolic processes. But we can see that it's affecting and potentiating the hormones of all the other fat burners in our body. So that's why, to me, because vitamin D helps boost the immune system, balance the immune system, it helps balance inflammation, it helps actually extract, use the nutrients in food to get it into the cell for energy, that all of these things are important. It probably doesn't do just one thing, that it helps out in hundreds of different metabolic processes. And that is its ability then to regulate and boost metabolism. So what I'm saying is that vitamin D should be an adjunct to most people's diets. Now, if you're not getting a tan and you haven't checked your vitamin D levels, you are most likely deficient in vitamin D. How can I say that? Well, I've literally done over 1,000 vitamin D tests, over 1,000. And I can tell you from clinical experience, even during the summertime, that most people are deficient in vitamin D. Now, are they within the 33 or 30 to 100 range on a lab test? Yes, but optimal is 50 to 70. So if you're not within the 50 to 70 range, then you consider yourself not optimal, which means can you boost your metabolism to a greater degree? If you're 35 on vitamin D, absolutely. Can you boost your immune system to a healthy degree? If you're not within 50, 70, yes, absolutely. So this is why if you are having trouble losing weight, if you're having trouble boosting your energy or balancing your immune system, you have to optimize vitamin D. It's so essential. So now, what's the best way to get vitamin D? Well, the best way to get vitamin D is the sun, of course. But we can only do that to a certain degree, meaning we need vitamin D on a daily basis. But so many of us, especially like myself here living in Boston and New England, where literally it's snowing as I look outside my window right now, there's no way if I were to go outside and try to get a tan from the sun that's going to happen. It's not going to happen. For me in Boston, it's not going to happen till June through essentially October. That's it. Those are the months that there's a strong enough vitamin D. maybe part of May. Maybe that's really pushing it, but most likely not. Temperatures aren't even warm enough to be able to get out there and really get enough sun exposure. Remember, just getting your arms and your face exposed to the sun is not enough to get vitamin D into your body. You really need full body exposure in a bathing suit at least 3 to 4 times a week. And again, as humans living near the equator, this would have happened every day of our life. But now, I know we work at offices. We're not getting the vitamin D that we need. We're in our home or whatever. And so that's why even in the summertime, most people are not optimized on vitamin D. However, I do recommend typically going lower in vitamin D during the summer and higher in supplementation during the winter. But at the same time, most people don't need to overdo it on vitamin D. They need about 4,000 IUs a day, maybe 5,000 IUs a day. As an adult, children, again, I typically recommend for each person about 35 IUs per pound of body weight. That seems to be the right measurement for most people. And then again, in the summertime, like I said, you go from 4,000 to 5,000 for adults, maybe down to 1,000 IUs, maybe 2,000 IUs. It really depends on your levels. The simplest thing is to test. So first, let's talk about how you can improve all of your levels. Well, there are clear things that we know right off the bat, and I hope that you're doing that. It is the new year. Let's get with it. Let's start to increase our exercise. Every other day exercise. Every other day exercise will help do this. It will help balance immune system based function. It will help balance the adrenals because after you come off that high for your exercise, not overdoing it, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of exercise, you'll actually start to get a drop then in cortisol, relaxation-based response. And what will happen as well is you actually boost your metabolism. You boost your metabolic rate by actually doing the exercise itself, okay? You'll better be able to uptake a glucose in the body. So really, really important. All right, next up, what I want you to do, increase cruciferous vegetables in your diet. Okay, that's the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, it's some kale, it's some cauliflower, all those great things. Just try 1 cup, 2 cups per day, all right? That's a great place to be. If you're not dealing with any digestive issues, if you're not on our Candida and bacterial overgrowth protocol, you can actually increase your garlic and onion, and that will help as well. What do these things contain? Sulfur, all right? Sulforaphane. It's going to help rid your body of the excess estrogen. It's going to help balance the overall immune system and detoxification process, which will also help your thyroid if you're dealing with detoxification-based issues. The next thing could actually be to do a formal detox. To do a 7, 14, or 21-day Dr. Cabral detox, or your favorite functional medicine detox if you're currently working with a health practitioner that's overseeing a different type of specific detox. Okay, the fourth thing that we're on to, because I want to give you a couple more, is to reduce your higher glycemic food intake, right? Reducing your breads, reducing your pastries, reducing all of those other things that are going to spike blood sugar. And maybe even for right now, for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, go lower on the fruit. You might want to just do your berries, your wild blueberries, your raspberries, your blackberries, your cherries, all the lower glycemic ones, and save the higher glycemic ones, or even moderate glycemic like banana and those types of things for after 3 weeks, after you started to kickstart your metabolism and kickstart your body transformation-based goals. All right, my last one, I have to give you this as stimulants. We need to go easy on the caffeine. Go easy on the caffeine, even if it comes from things like black tea or even our favorites like green tea, okay? You can still do green tea. You can do a cup in the morning, maybe a cup right after your meal for maybe aid in digestion if it's nice and hot. But at the same time, if we're doing coffee, if we're doing black tea, let's keep it to 1 cup after breakfast, all right? 1 cup of dark, organic. It can be light roast, right? Because light roast is better. But it has to be after the meal, ideally, to aid in digestion and to decrease that spike in caffeine. But we just don't want to overdo it, all right? So wherever you're at now, listen to my podcast on how to wean off of caffeine. StephenCabral.com/podcast. Check out that show because that's going to help. Why would you need to wean off the stimulants? Well, for one, they're going to spike the adrenals, right? They're going to spike cortisol in many people. We'll talk about that more tomorrow too when I go through a little bit more of the body types. And by doing that, it can also spike blood sugar levels. Believe it or not, just drinking caffeine can spike blood sugar. That's what a lot of people, unfortunately, all the experts aren't looking into that. So when they're recommending like coffee for breakfast and saying like, oh, it's an easy way to ease into the day, no digestion taking place, or to say like, hey, let's put some fat in the coffee. People don't understand. That's not going to keep you in a state of an intermittent fast. It's not. It's most likely going to spike your blood sugar. And it's going to do that endogenously, even if you don't add sugar to your coffee. Because again, it's going to spike. Once you understand how the body works, then you understand all these different mechanisms. It's also why we're able to help people, really from a clinical-based perspective to achieve all of their goals, whether it be weight loss, balancing the immune system, balancing the thyroid, the adrenals, is because we know that just because something's sugar-free doesn't mean it's not going to cause weight gain, because it will. All right, my last thing, my highest recommendation. Yes, you can do all of these amazing things through lifestyle, and you should. There's no doubt about that. But a lot of times before people get started, they like to give a baseline or get a baseline of where they're at. Every single thing I mentioned today, your estrogen, your progesterone, which I didn't mention, DHEA and testosterone, your adrenals, looking at your cortisol upon waking, right before lunch, mid-afternoon, and before bed to look at sleep and how much energy output you're putting through the cortisols, to look at your thyroid, TPO, TSH, T4, T3, to really look at that whole thyroid. It's so important to look at your insulin, to look at your hemoglobin A1C, and to look at your vitamin D. I can't recommend to you enough. I do this once a year for myself, every single year. And about one more month from now, that's when I do it every year. So what I run is this thing called the thyroid plus adrenal plus hormone lab, all right? So important to look at your overall levels. If you don't know what your levels are, you may always be kind of guessing and guesstimating, okay, this might be off based on my symptoms, this might be off, or how does the thyroid relate to the adrenals, or how does that relate to my estrogen dominance, and so on and so forth. It looks at everything. It is an amazing test. It really is. So it's often called our weight loss test, weight maintenance test, but really what it is a straightforward functional medicine-based test to look at your thyroid, adrenals, and hormones. How do you perform it? Simple. 4 tubes during the day. You just collect your saliva. You can just put it in your pocket at work. Super simple. Spit into a little tube. You can go to the bathroom, do that. Just spit into it. Put it back in your pocket. Meal them all in the next day. Really simple. How do you test your thyroid? All right. Blood spot test. Simple finger prick. Fill up the different circles on the card. Let that air dry. Send it in the next day when you send in your saliva tubes. Super simple. It just gets sent directly to the lab. Remember, we are not the lab. And at no point will I ever have a lab company. What I do is I recommend the best of the best. I recommend labs that you can do right at home. We can get the clinical data. When your lab results come in, they come directly to me. I am the actual one who reads your results. I look it over, I make my recommendations, and then you get a 30-minute call. Or if you run like other labs as well, you might be upgraded. You actually get a coaching call. Why do we do that? Why do we not just send you the lab results like a lot of people? I want you to understand what your results mean. I really do. So that is a 30-minute call with a health coach. We're talking a little bit about what symptoms you have going on. They're going over the results with you. And then they're also going over your plan, my recommendations, their recommendations based on where you're at. It is just like being in a private practice. It really is, but at a fraction of the price. I can't recommend enough. I'm going to link that up today in the show notes. So for today's show, simply go to StephenCabral.com/712. StephenCabral.com/712. I'm going to link up that lab test today. And I'm also going to put anything else that we might have missed for notes in there. I hope today's show helped you to really look at how the body works from an overall metabolism standpoint. Remember, there are no mysteries. If you haven't been able to lose the weight, if you haven't been able to get well, if you haven't been able to fix your thyroid, fix your adrenals, fix your blood sugar, there's a reason why. By running a thyroid adrenal hormone panel, it will show you exactly why. Even if you don't, you'll have the better understanding now of how to course correct, of how to rebalance your body, that it's not just one thing or one supplement. It's by rebalancing the body, the lifestyle, the nutrition, the exercise, all of those things, the sleep. It's going to get you to where you need to be. And I'm telling you, when you do these things, your life changes. You have a better mood. You have a better outlook. You have more ambition. You have more drive. You have more energy. You have all of these things that you've always wanted. And it happens from balancing the body at a root level. Hopefully today's show was helpful. Please do feel free to pass this show on to anyone you believe it could help. Ever wonder what the best sauna, blue blockers, sleep trackers, wake lights, salt lamps, or other health gadgets are? Or what about the top non-toxic mattresses, sheets, soaps, bath products, toothpaste, and cookware? Or would you like to know the cleanest choices for hemp parts, meal delivery services, supplements, and much more? I personally curated, researched, and now created a resource page of all of my top picks that continues to grow each week. These are the exact products I use in my own life, with my family, in my private practice, and they're the ones I trust. To find out all of my up-to-date recommendations and all the details, simply head on over to StephenCabral.com/resources.